Okay, so I guess the initial purpose of this meeting was so I could hand off all the work that I was doing on the URL syncing with security dashboards and beyond. But then last week we kind of found out the hard way that the Defend and Secure were kind of working on the same thing. So I thought it'd be useful to bring Savash in on this, since he was kind of working on a similar thing, and Mark as well, because he's been helping out with this whole thing. And I think you created the original issue on this as well, actually, Mark. So we can kind of get together. I can say, go through what we had before, what the plan was, where I got up to, and then where we kind of overlap with Defend. And then in theory, we should be able to come up with a plan going forward as to how we do this across the stages, so we're not treading on each other's toes too much. So have you all got the agenda document there? I've set it up so that while I'm waffling through the first few points, you can add questions so we can get to them, and then we'll just have a big discussion at the end. Cool. So if I was prepared, I would have totally preferred a demo of what we had before, but I'm not, so I don't have that demo. But what we did have before, when security dashboards were all done with the REST endpoints, so before we had the standalone vulnerabilities-based security dashboards, we were using ViewRouter to sort of persist the filters in the URL. So every time we changed the filters, it would send an event or whatever it is up to ViewRouter, so that ViewRouter would change the URL. And we were kind of treating it like a single page application, and there was all sorts of bugs and weird quirks that came up because of that, like where it would just totally take over your browser history. And once you were on the security dashboard, you were locked in unless you typed something else in your browser or clicked away from it. So it wasn't ideal, and using ViewRouter was maybe a little bit overkill. Like, it seemed like a shortcut, not a shortcut, but like a simple solution at the time. But it was just sort of more hassle than it was worth, really. So when we migrated some of the dashboards to the standalone vulnerability stuff, we didn't include the ViewRouter stuff, just because knowing it was broken. So there didn't seem much point in shoehorning a broken thing into the dashboards. So we kind of left it alone, knowing that we would come back to it with this. I will share my screen for the proposed solution if I just load it up. 103, I think it is. Yes. So where are we? Okay. So this issue was created, it was like a year ago. Oh, there you go, a year ago by Mark. And this was when we were initially having the problems with the ViewRouter thing and syncing URLs. And the idea was to make something that was totally reusable, that we could just hook into this dashboard or into anything else in GitLab that wanted to do a similar thing. Like if we had to persist filters somewhere else, or persist the state of something else in the browser and the URL or whatever. So this comment was kind of the original approach we thought we should take. Start off by ripping out all of the router logic from the dashboard stores. So this is the original dashboard, because obviously the standalone dashboards didn't have them in at this point. So it was removing it from the old dashboards. Update the URL sync mixin. So there's a URL sync mixin that, who was it? Yes, Ezekiel had created, which kind of did basically what we wanted. But the problem was it was a mixin, and I'm not alone in hating mixins. I don't think there's too much magic in them. So we wanted to. I've Oh, actually, this isn't the plan. This was the first draft of the plan. So this says update it to watch real deep like. So I'll come back to that. The idea was to move it to a component so that it would make using it a little bit easier. The watching real deep like part is that this mixin actually only watched the first layer of an object. So if you have an object with an array inside and you changed anything in that array, it wouldn't actually update the URL because it could only watch one level deep. So we had to update it to make sure it watched deep enough for what we needed. Then the plan was, I know it says add the URL sync mixin at the security dashboards, but it was to add the URL sync component that we created to the security dashboards so that we could do the one-way kind of thing. So we would just push in the state to the URL. You couldn't actually go to a URL and get the filters because step 4 was doing exactly that. So wiring it back in so that if you go to security dashboard /filters equals severity critical, whatever, it would then change the filters on the page. So that was the original plan. And we got so far through this. I've probably not kept this up to date. I've not. Now I have. So we removed the router logic from all the dashboard stores, and unknowingly at the same time, Savash was re-adding the router logic to the dashboard stores, which I guess makes sense if you didn't know about this issue and what we were trying to do, which is why we've pulled everyone into this one. And that's still in on the standalone dashboard stuff using the old router. So we're now in the opposite situation where the standalone dashboards has it and the other dashboards don't anymore. And the URL sync component is created and merged. So we have this component, which I'll show you a little later. And you can pass it a query and it'll watch that query and do what you need to do. And add the URL sync component to the security dashboards. I started on this. I got a whip MR in where it kind of works, but also not really. And that's kind of where we were up to. So where I've wrote security dashboards, I can't actually remember which ones I added it to. Let me just quickly check. Yes, so I only added it to the first class standalone. That's easier to say. Standalone vulnerabilities dashboard in this MR. I'm pretty sure this MR can be scrapped. We can just use it as reference because everything's changed since I wrote this. But this does kind of show how it works. So actually, it might be easy. I've got it checked out here. Let me just move this stupid Zoom thing. What file is this? Oh, I didn't scroll up. There we are. Right. Okay. So I have used. There we are. So this is the URL sync component. And all I've done is I've passed the URL sync component, the query to watch, which is the URL filters query, which is up here. And it's a computed property that's based on the filters object. So if we were to pass the filters object directly, it would just write a load of nonsense in the URL bar because it can't handle it in the format that it is because it uses sets rather than actual objects and things. So I've just looped through all the filters and basically just passed it so that it's in a like a format that the URL bar can pass or whatever, and then we just return that. And now every time we update filters, it updates the URL filters computed property, which then updates this URL sync thing and updates it in the address bar. Which, if the GDK was working, fingers crossed, it's not, Yeah, this has been doing this for about 2 hours now, so I don't think it's going to start. So there is, if you go in this MR, there is a YouTube video here. I'm not going to play it for you, but it basically demos what I was about to demo for you. I can maybe skip through and get to the bit where you can see what's happening. So yeah, there you go. I'm changing the filters down here, and it's adding them to the address bar. And yeah, you get the idea. I don't know what I'm saying at this point, but I'm probably saying something similar to what I'm saying right now. There you go. Back and forward works as well. It's not actually updating the filters down here as we change the address bar, because that wasn't part of this MR, but that is something we would need to do. Okay, I've definitely barreled through this, but if there's any questions or anything at this point.
I have.
Yes.
So the code assumes that the object is a source of the truth, right? So we are updating the query parameters based on that object, not updating the object based on the query parameters.
Yes, in this instance. So we would only update the object based on the query parameters once the page loads, and then that's it. That's the only time we would do it. So if you went to that URL, you would load in the you would populate that object and change it so that the filters match the URL. But then after that, only changes to the filters would change the URL. Otherwise, I think we might have ended out in this situation before where we have this infinite loop where one updates the other, which updates the other, and it's not a fun time.
And how do we read? Do we use window location to read the query parameter, or we use the URL sync component in order to read the query parameters at page load?
I don't know. We haven't actually written that bit in yet, so that's for whoever picks this back up to work out. The URL, it's weird. So it's called the URL sync component, but it's one-way syncing. It only pushes things up to the URL. I don't think it reads things back. I did create. Let's see if this will work. Yeah, right. Right, I don't. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, okay. None of my demos are working today, but in this white box, you would see a demo of where I'm pushing it up to the URL, and then there's a button I can click that just pulls it back down from the URL. I'll add this to the docs as well, just in case that starts working. But yeah, so there's ways to do it, but that's not part of the MR that I was just showing you. It's not in there yet. Okay, I did have a question myself. Obviously, I'm not asking it to myself. This is to everyone else who's on the call. So, do we want to preserve browser history in the browser? So if you change a filter to say critical, and then you click back, do you want to go back to the page you were previously on, or would you want to undo adding that filter? So currently it works the second way, which felt right at the time, but maybe that is a bit weird.
With the changes, with the latest changes, it follows the back. So when you click back, it updates the filters. So if we don't implement this, it's stripping out this behavior, which is introduced lately. So I don't think it's a problem. But as I replied in the docs, I think this is something that UX people might need to be involved, because to me it makes sense. that when the user clicks back, it brings it to the previous state. But as Mark pointed in the issue, it's also true that if the user clicks a lot of filters, then they will have a long list before they can go back. So
yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right there. We should bring, this is a UX question, isn't it? It's not honest. There is an issue that was created off the back of one of these MRs. I can't remember which one it was, about being able to pass a prop to the URL sync component to say, do we push state or replace state? So I think adding that in to the URL sync component would be good, so that when that decision is made, it's just a case of changing that prop and then everything should work. So we're ready for it. And then other people can do it as well if they wanted to use the URL sync component for whatever they were using.
I also have another question. The URL sync component is supposed to sync only the query parameters, not the path. Is it?
Say that again, sorry?
So the URL sync component, it's supposed to sync only the query parameters, but not the path.
Yes. That's where it differs from view router. It's just the query parameters. It's not everything. It's maybe not the best name for it, but I was going on the naming of the sync mixing.
Okay, so perhaps makes sense renaming something like a URL query sync, or because initially I thought that this was also syncing the path, so it was really mimicking the view router.
I think that's a good idea, and it touches on. So we had this big discussion on that issue or MR, I can't remember where, about why not just use view router, and the argument being that it's too heavyweight. Well, I think the right tool to use really depends on what we're trying to achieve. Like, if we only ever want to, like, the simplest possible thing that we could do is read the query parameters on load, update the store accordingly, and just keep writing back and replacing the history as we change the filters. That, I think, is where something like the URL query, the URL sync or URL query sync component is best, because like it's dead simple. Put the component in, you read it in initialization time what the URL is, and you're done. Like, that's it. I guess you have to write some to query. So you have to write some like Sam had a function there which generated the query params from the state, but we also need state from query params to do the other way around. So that's the dead simple case. We have two functions basically: read and write to do the bidirectional thing, and the sync. If we want to preserve back button behavior, that's where I think the URL sync component is potentially not the best case, because then we need to start listening for history pop state events and stuff like that. And where would that live? Would that live in URL sync? I don't know. At that point, we're replicating quite a bit of what view router offers. So, I mean, the grass is always greener on the other side. Like, part of the thing that made me want to rip out view router was that we had all these workarounds. It was like, oh, I want to get away from this. But if we're trying to replicate a lot of the behavior, we're going to end up in exactly the same place. So I think URL sync is good if we want to really simplify the browser history behavior. But if we want to keep it advanced and have back and forth and so on, and provide future flexibility, then maybe view router is the right thing to stick with, which sounds like I've gone back on what I said before, which maybe I have, in which case I apologize, but that's my feeling right now. So if UX say, yeah, replace the history, then URL sync component seems to make sense to me, because it's dead simple. Anything more than that, maybe view router is the right way to go.
So
there's also, yeah, go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to quickly ask if I'd been naive in thinking that hitting the back button would cause hitting the back button's a totally different event, isn't it, to reloading the page? As far as
I think there's a window emits a history pop state event, and I think view router itself listens for that event, and that's what we would have to do if we were to implement this ourselves. And well, it listens for that event and does whatever it needs to do to update the state and notify things and whatever.
So the sort of the uncreated view lifecycle hook, whatever it's called, that wouldn't get fired because we're not recreating that component. We're just going back.
Yeah. So when you want to do, so that's my thinking. When you want, so the monitoring dashboard does, I think, dead simple history replacement, which is what I'm talking about. And that's why they use the URL sync mixin or something to that effect. They don't use view router.
The URL sync mixin is the thing that uses not history replacement.
Oh, so does that mean the back button is broken in the monitoring dashboard? That could be the case.
Very possibly.
I think so, yeah.
Well, that's, yeah. So let me just share my screen. So here is the monitoring dashboard. If I edit this, really slow. So it crashed. It kind of has hung the browser.
It says there was an error.
I don't think that's what's, oh God, it's so slow. Okay, so it's updated that. Ah, that's what they do, yes. Okay. Oh, I'd forgotten this. When you change the filters, it triggers a reload, an actual reload of the page. I'd forgotten that detail. That's what they're doing, and that's why they're using a simple like URL sync kind of thing, because they just refresh the page and then they don't have to worry about browser history state.
We don't want that, or
No,
do we?
No, I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay.
No, I think there's an issue somewhere that's been around for like a year that they want to stop doing that, because it takes, as you can see, it takes forever to load the dashboard. So they don't want to keep reloading it whenever you change a filter. So let's not do it that way.
There's also one more use case. I think it's in the instance level dashboard. When you click on configure dashboard, it's not updating the URL at all. It's just changing the state internally. And then based on the state change, we display either the vulnerability list or the project configuration view where you can add or delete. So if we were to iterate on that and then bring it to next level and then keep the URL consistent. So for instance, you have a URL for that view instead of just being an internal state change. In that case, the back button would make sense, for instance. So you hit on the configure dashboard and then it updates the URL and then you click back. It needs to go back if we do that.
We could do that, yeah. Again, I think that's a UX question. Like, do we want that page to be deep linkable? I don't know. In my opinion, so I've implemented that, in fact, as it was, using just a simple state thing, because I thought we don't want to link. Why would you want to link to this page specifically? It doesn't need to be a part of state, I guess. But maybe that's debatable. So. Yeah, so I think all of this hinges on what do we want the browser history behavior to be.
What's the boring solution?
The boring solution is stick with what we've got, I guess. What have we got right now?
The router in the first standalone dashboards.
Yeah, view route is still in place.
Yes.
In the standalone dashboards, yeah, but in the other ones, I might have deleted it.
Well, the other ones are being thrown away, right?
Apart from pipeline, yeah.
So that's not and the pipeline one doesn't work well with a router because something else on the page is already manipulating the URL. So that's kind of out the window.
So yeah, maybe the boring solution is to just do nothing and keep this in the back of our minds.
Just remember that we have an upcoming issue to move the pipeline to the so the vulnerability list to a tab in the MR. So in the MR, you will have a new tab, security tab. So clicking on that one, should it? So do we use? I never touched that code. Do we use the router there or?
In the merge request view?
Yes.
No, I don't think we use a router. We use some unholy mess of stuff.
Okay.
I'm just going to wish you luck on that one. It's a strange one.
Crucially as well, I guess, okay. for the MR page, that won't be standalone vulnerabilities. That will be vulnerability occurrences, won't it?
Yes. Yes, I guess so. So I'm just brainstorming here.
Yeah.
But I think there we don't need the filters. It's just a list. I think, if I remember correctly, I just reviewed the issue for the planning breakdown. But as far as I can remember, it's just the list, no filters at all.
I think even if we did have the filters, we wouldn't need URL linkable filters on that page specifically. I mean, I understand why you would want to link to a page of critical vulnerabilities, but not why you would want to link to a page of critical vulnerabilities on a specific MR. Like, it seems a bit too drilled down.
Yeah, which is also by nature transient. You know, the MR might not live that long, and people might push commits which fix things as you go. So yeah, the current solution with a view router is pluggable, right? As in, it's implemented in such a way that some views can use it and some views don't. Like
so
the pipeline.
In the security dashboards, the only place we use it's the filters component. So if that's the question.
No, I meant, well, yes. Okay, so that's the thing. Before standalone vulnerabilities came along, the security dashboard had no concept of the router. It just simply had a store state and dump components. The router was like a plugin that synced store state to the URL, which meant that that allowed the pipeline security dashboard not to include any of that functionality. But everything else did. Do the filters now, do the standalone vulnerability filters component assume the existence of a router? Okay, so that's a problem, I guess. Well, no, it's not a problem.
Sam's MR, I think it's the whip one. It's just so it's plug and play, right? You just use the URL sync component and it worked, except the back button. I guess the one in the whip.
Yeah, but it's plug and configure and play, I would say.
Okay. Okay. Just remembered one more use case. So I think the issue with GraphQL Pagination has been fixed. So we may reintroduce pagination. In that case, clicking on the next page should it bring, like, if we don't refresh the whole page, we need to keep the browser history.
Well, GraphQL Pagination doesn't support. You can only do, is there a next page? Is there a previous page? You can't say, take me to page 4. So we can't maintain any state there because we don't know what page we're on, if you see what I mean. We can't say refresh to this page because we don't have a reference to what page we're on. So that would have to not be part of the history state.
But why we have first, and like we have the first argument, right? So if page is 5, for instance, we can say first is 100, and then it will serve.
It's because GraphQL doesn't allow that kind of pagination. You can't do, that's called offset pagination, and GraphQL, our GraphQL implementation does not support, and intentionally doesn't support offset pagination.
The only way you could implement it really was if you wanted to fetch page 5, you'd have to fetch page 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then scrap page 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then fetch page 5.
Please don't do that.
Yeah, well, no. So this is why it's lazy loaded, and you start with page 1, and then it just gets so that you kind of need to stop thinking about it in pages, and you fetch all of these vulnerabilities, and then the next 20 after the last one in that list, and then the next 20 after the last one in that list. So pages doesn't. It's a weird thing to. So the way I try and think of it is no one realistically ever wants to link to page 2 of a list that constantly changes, because what is that list?
Yeah, true. Makes sense. I implemented something like that, by the way, in the vulnerability chart component. So if it's 90 days, the frame, the interval that we need to fetch, since the backend returns only 10 results, I have to fetch 9 times. So it's like I'm doing that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9 till 9. Okay, so then yeah. So
I was going to say, I think that's maybe one situation where fetching page 2 makes sense, because page 2 is always going to be the same because it's historical data. You can't rewrite history.
Yeah.
Unless you replace it. Sorry, just a view research joke there.
Okay, so I think then in the dashboards, the only use case I can see is if we persist the history. Otherwise, we can use the URL sync component if the UX agrees that back button is ignorable.
Should we change it to replace state then?
If UX.
If the yes.
I think adding the option to switch it to replace state on the URL sync component would be a good step anyway, because then people can use it. If we don't need to use it, fine, whatever. It's not a huge change really. We've not chucked loads of work away if it never ends up getting used. Sorry, go on, Mark.
Sorry, I did interrupt you. Please continue.
I was about to interrupt myself. It's fine.
Based on the fact that if you push history, then the back button is going to do basically nothing useful, which suggests to me that replacing history should be the default of this function of this component, which is a breaking change, but no one's using it yet, right? So then hopefully.
Do we say the default or the only option, given that the one that we've got now is clearly not great and no one's using it? So if we're going to make that change, we make that change now rather than wait until someone's using it.
I think it's dead simple to give the option, as in you just change the function you call based on the prop, right? I feel like change the default, but provide the option.
Okay, that seems sensible.
Is it going to replace the mixin? Is that the plan as well? So,
it's currently living alongside the mixin, because the idea of changing the metrics dashboards that uses it, I didn't want to do that, if I'm being honest. And if they decide they want to use this component, then they can. That's great. But that's kind of outside of our scope, I would say.
Cool.
I mean, if it were up to me, I would just delete all mixins immediately from the code base, but it's not up to me. So.
You're a maintainer now. You can delete them and then approve your own.
I could, but I think probably I shouldn't do that. Might
Oh no,
be
you shouldn't, but
possibly-
you can.
Yeah, true. There is that distinction. Yeah.
So for filling out this proposed next steps thing, I'm going to say add default option to use replace state. I'm gonna write Dave there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Dave. And then I guess the other next step is just do nothing to the other dashboards unless we decide that we need to use the replace state. Then we can swap it with.
Well, I guess
I would suggest to go and ask the UX first, so we understand what we need to do, and then based on that decision, we can move forward. I think whether we should keep the back button working, because neither of them supports, like if we replace or push the state, it doesn't. So we need to. So if we persist the, so if we keep the behavior of the back button, then we need to do the two-way binding, and then in that case, I think view router makes more sense. So that's why I think we first need to figure out with the UX whether we need to keep this behavior or not.
Does that sound? I don't know if you've all got the document open. Does that sound reasonable though? Ask for UX whether we should replace it, use replace or use push state. If it's push state, just keep view router because it's there and it kind of already does that. If it's replace state, we could consider using the URL query component. Should we also maybe rename URL sync mixin? That's what it's called. Component to something that actually describes what it does. Only syncs query params
in one direction.
Yeah, in one direction.
So sync URL query params in one direction component rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, we can just call it slusk or yeah. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Naming is hard, right?
Yeah, naming is hard. That's why I've not put forward a name for this. But yeah, I think Savash is right. Naming is hard, and we've got it wrong in this case because it does not describe what it's really doing at all. It makes it seem like it's way more magic than it is. Okay, so they seem like sensible next steps for me. Do people want to take ownership of these? I would happily do it, but it is my last day on Secure, so.
Oh really? I didn't appreciate it was your last day. Didn't understand that.
Well, it would have been tomorrow, but Sid took that day away from us.
So I have Sid to blame. Okay.
This is why I've got the farewell Terminator thumbs up in the background. It's.
I can ask to the UX people. I can take ownership on that.
Does anyone know how I do that thing that PMs always do where it says take ownership of this thing when I click on it? Is it just a comment?
Yeah, I think if you...
Ah,
yeah, there you go. You got it.
there you go. See? Manager now, I know what I'm doing.
Just in time.
Figured it out. I figured it out.
You figured out the
Where
secret to being a manager like the day before you need it.
This is delegation, right?
Where should I update this document with the response, or?
It might be a good idea to do it in the original issue, which I will link to. I'll put it at the top.
Perfect.
Because.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay. And then I've already kind of wrote Dave here, so unless he protests, would you? I mean, I guess we could say Dave, and then if you're not, you don't have the availability for it, just send it back to Neil, and you can rejig it.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good. Happy to do it.
Basically, delegate to Neil to delegate.
Yeah.
Nice.
There we go. Right.
Meta managing. You're a pro, Sam. Yeah.
I got this.
You delegated to Dave to delegate to Neil to delegate.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And then that last one, just I guess whatever, right? I'm not going to tell anyone to come up with a name. They can figure that out. If you want to rename it while you're replacing the replace state, go for it. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you for this. Is there any concerns, questions, anything anyone has at this point, or are we all pretty clear on where we're going?
The recording, will you link that to the doc, or?
Good point. I will upload it to YouTube. I'll put it in the document, and I'll send you it. I'll probably put it in the secure and probably the defend channels as well. Do you have a defend front end channel?
I guess we have. It's I will send it to you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'll put it in there.
Yeah. It's S defend front end, but I will link it in the docs.
Cool. Thanks, Sebash. Okay. Well, if we're all happy then, I'll see you all hopefully later. We're cool.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.